our project was to look at period rooms in museums and to think about how we might use the museum as a staging post to think about what the museum does when it kind of narrativizes history. So it's kind of a self-reflective project. The project itself, sorry, Howard?
The Bowes Museum, large French 19th century museum in the market town of Barnard Castle, high aspirations, international aspirations, but in the 1950s they carved out a series of English collections in the form of period rooms in the space there.
The project itself was built around a conference that we organised, a 3-day conference that we organised at the Bowes Museum, from which we had Paul Mellon funding for. We organised 2 workshops that worked with the conference itself, one workshop prior to the Bowes Museum conference, one after. Our project team was a colleague, Dr. Jane Whittaker, who's head of collections, Howard here, myself, and we also had 2 student interns, one from the undergraduate museum programme that we have at the university and one from the postgraduate museum programme to try and get intergenerational activities going.
These were the period rooms as they were in about 1980s, set up in the 70s, Stuart room, 17th century Tudor room, and Georgian room, and they were slightly out of date. What do the rooms do? They've got quite nice things in. So it was decided to reinstate the 3 main galleries that had been there up to 1950s. More space for textiles, very popular, exhibition space. But the result was we squeezed the rooms into one big space in the centre. And here you see them being dismantled. That's from Chesterfield House, London. It was a chance to number them. Reinstate the spaces, which incidentally was seen as a fire risk because of the gaps we were advised by the fire department they weren't safe. But in the process, we uncovered some quite interesting inscriptions. When these panels have been moved in the past, someone signed 1829, that is, and then this funny little fitting of boxes. That's something we half knew existed, but hadn't seen them in our lifetime. And left us with a problem, of course. We didn't reinstate the whole room, so we've got a problem with storage, which we solved, we hope, by putting it on racks, but that's an ongoing issue with the museum, as with other museums.
And one of the first workshop, we took the students and myself to see the storage areas, which are away from the Bowes Museums, just to get a sense of what was happening. And this is the redisplay.
Yes, in fragments, there's no attempt to make you think you're in a space. Palladian, Rococo, panning as we call it, but you experience them as individual objects rather than as space.
And in workshop 1, which was to think about the planning for both the conference itself, but also what we wanted to get out of the discussions, if you like, the debates between the museum, the university and the students, which resulted in very good knowledge exchange between, I teach museum studies, but actually working with a museum professional was very interesting. The conference itself was an international conference with people from America, from the Louvre in Paris and all sorts of other universities. As you can see, there were 80 delegates at the conference from all over the world. This is a shot of the conference itself. So it allowed academics, museum professionals, conservators even, to talk about period rooms as a kind of, they're a complex problem because they've been cut from somewhere else, placed into the museum. They require certain kinds of narrative strategies and practical strategies. It also allowed Howard and Jane to
talk to an international audience about our collections that can be difficult to achieve in a small town like Barnard Castle. I could see curators from London across the world there, that we had a direct dialogue, face-to-face dialogue.
And we created a Period Rooms blog. The conference itself was not just a kind of passive environment where you had academics and museum people talking to an audience, but also we structured right in the middle of the conference some sand pits where we actually got dirty and talked about all sorts of interesting things that allowed everybody to participate in the conference. And the student interns actually produced a report, which you actually saw in there. We got a this is the conference. This is my unconventional conference photograph. This is me on a chair photographing the conference. I said I wanted a picture, and they went, they have to stand up at the back. So the significant absence is me, of course. But anyway, the workshop itself, the number 2 workshop where we came to the university on reflection, allowed us to reflect on the conference itself. Our student interns produced a wonderful evaluation document of the conference. It allowed further knowledge exchange to emerge from that. We've created a virtual network now, which is going to be hosted by, hopefully, fingers crossed, hosted by the Bowes Museum. I've got a meeting on Tuesday to discuss that with them further. We're going to put in a real network funding bid for the HRC or Leverhulme to travel across Europe and into America. A book will be produced from it, a kind of standard academic output, edited by Howard, Jane and myself. which will also be kind of practice theory dynamics in there. It's not just a kind of history of period rooms, but also some kind of practical issues about how you deal with these kind of things. And ultimately, one of the things we're working towards is a kind of research in practice at the Bowes Museum itself. This is the period rooms at the Bowes Museum as they are now. It allows us to think about museum interpretation. It allows us to, it integrates into the museum studies programs at Leeds, and it allows us to think about ultimately the kind of fly in the ointment, if you like, for the project is to allow the museum to become reflective on its own historical processes, because the museum is a framing effect for history. And to understand that is to understand how the museum mobilizes objects. And we want not just us as museum professionals or me as an academic to understand that, but ultimately we'd like the public to understand that actually when they go to the museum, they're engaging in a certain kind of historical presentation, of which the museum itself is participant within that. That's it.